Jake was up before sunrise like always. The farm didn't run itself, and on Kepler 442b, the early hours were the only time you could work without the heat beating down on you. He'd been running this soybean operation for 12 years now, ever since the colony was established. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. He understood soil, equipment, and the rhythm of seasons. That's what mattered out here. He was heading toward the eastern fields when he noticed something wrong. There was a gouge in the earth, like something had plowed through the ground with tremendous force. His heart sank. Crop damage meant lost income, and income was tight on the colony. But as he walked closer, he realized it wasn't just damaged soil. There was metal. A lot of it. Jake stopped dead in his tracks. A massive ship lay half buried in his field, its sleek hull glinting in the pale light. It wasn't anything he'd ever seen before, definitely not human design. The structure was too smooth, almost organic looking, with panels that seemed to flow into each other like liquid that had frozen mid-motion. Strange symbols covered parts of the exterior, glowing faintly with a sickly blue light that was fading fast. Jake could hear a low humming sound coming from inside, like a wounded animal trying to survive. He approached carefully. His hands were already reaching for his multi-tool out of habit. Whatever this was, it was damaged. Badly. That's when she emerged. The woman climbed down from a hatch using what looked like an emergency ladder, moving with strange, deliberate grace. Jake took a step back. She was tall, taller than him by a good foot, and her skin was so pale it was almost white, like someone who'd never seen sunlight. Her hair was dark, nearly black, and fell straight past her shoulders. But her eyes were what really grabbed him. They caught the sunrise and reflected it back like mirrors, a pale violet color that didn't look quite natural. She wore a dark, fitted suit that seemed to move with her, adjusting itself to every motion. Jake had been on this colony long enough to know that most visitors came through official channels. This woman clearly hadn't. "Hey," he called out, trying to sound calm even though his pulse was racing. "Are you all right?" She turned to him, and for just a moment he saw fear flash across her face, raw, desperate fear. But she covered it quickly, straightening her shoulders and forcing a neutral expression. "Yes," she said, walking toward him. Her voice was smooth but had an accent he couldn't place. It wasn't any human language he'd heard before, even though her words were clear. "I am functional. But my ship is not. My core systems are failing." Jake looked back at the vessel. The humming was getting weaker and some of the lights had already gone dark. He was just a farmer, but he knew enough about mechanics to recognize a failing power system when he heard one. Whatever was keeping this ship alive was running out of juice fast. "How long do you have?" he asked. "Hours," she said simply. "Perhaps less. The core will fail completely soon, and when it does." She paused, looking away toward the horizon where the sun was rising higher. "I do not survive without it." Jake didn't ask questions he wasn't sure he wanted answers to. Instead, he did what he always did. He got to work. "My name's Jake. I've got some tools back at the main house and a workshop. Let me see what I can do." She followed him across the field, and Jake noticed she kept her head slightly down, away from the direct sunlight. She moved quickly but didn't speak. He was too focused on the problem at hand to ask why she seemed uncomfortable in broad daylight. When they reached his workshop, a converted barn filled with equipment, Jake got her to explain the basics of the ship's systems. Her technical knowledge was far beyond anything he'd expected, and she guided him through the alien machinery with patient precision. He worked quickly, hands moving over circuits and components he didn't fully understand, but his instinct for engineering kept him moving in the right direction. Hours passed. Jake barely noticed when Vex brought him something to eat, rare, barely cooked meat on a plate. He ate it without thinking, too focused on the work. He didn't see her watching him carefully, didn't notice her slight smile when he didn't seem bothered by the food choice. By afternoon, the core's humming had stabilized. Not fixed completely, but stable. Jake wiped his forehead and looked at Vex. She looked relieved, genuinely relieved, in a way that made him realize just how serious her situation had been. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "I did not expect that. Most species would have simply reported us to your authorities." Jake just shrugged. "Seemed like you needed help. That's what people do." But neither of them knew yet just how much that decision would change everything. Jake couldn't sleep that night. After Vex had gone to rest in his guest room, he sat in his workshop, staring at the ship's console. The diagnostics were still running and he had time to kill. He'd been curious about the ship's systems all day, but he'd been too busy with the emergency repairs to really dig deep. Now, with the core stabilized, his engineer's mind wanted to understand what he was actually working with. He pulled up the navigation logs first. Standard stuff: coordinates, trajectory data, fuel consumption rates. Nothing that made much sense to him, mostly numbers and symbols and languages he didn't recognize. But then he noticed something labeled differently. A personal file. The kind of thing someone creates when they want to keep a record of their own thoughts, not just technical data. Jake hesitated. He knew he should probably stop there. This felt like an invasion of privacy. But something in him needed to understand who this woman really was and why she'd crashed in his field looking like she'd been running from something. He opened the file. What he found made his blood run cold. The logs were old, incredibly old. Hundreds of years old, judging by the dates. But they were all in English, or at least in a language he could read. And they were personal, deeply personal. Vex describing worlds she'd visited, civilizations she'd encountered, and over again, a growing sense of despair and loss. But it was one particular entry that stopped his heart. The Devourer has reached Sector 7. Another world gone. Millions dead. I was too slow again. I'm always too slow. They call me a myth, a legend, something to fear, the last vampire of the old kingdoms. But what good is immortality if you can't save anyone? What good is centuries of life if you can only watch civilizations burn? Jake read through more entries. They painted a picture of something terrifying. The Devourer wasn't a weapon or a ship or anything mechanical. It was something alive, or something that had been alive once. It consumed entire worlds, draining the life force from everything in its path. Plants, animals, people, it didn't matter. Everything just withered and died when it came near. Entire civilizations had been erased from existence. And Vex had been hunting it for so long that Jake could barely comprehend the time span. Centuries. She'd been chasing this thing across the galaxy for centuries, always arriving too late, always finding dead worlds instead of living ones. The most recent entries were different though. Desperate. Vex's ship had tracked the Devourer to this sector of space. She'd finally gotten ahead of it, positioned herself to intercept. But something had gone wrong. A catastrophic collision. Her weapon systems had failed. She'd been forced to crash land and hope that the core could be repaired before the Devourer caught up. The final entry was dated just days before she crashed into his field. If I cannot fix my ship, I will die here on this colony world. Perhaps that is for the best. I have failed for so long. These people, the humans of Kepler 442b, they deserve to live. I will not let the Devourer reach them. I will die before I allow another world to fall. Jake sat back in his chair, his mind spinning. Vampire. The word seemed impossible, ridiculous even. But the logs were real. The fear in them was real. And the threat she was describing, it was real too. He had to talk to her. He found Vex on the back porch, sitting in the darkness. She wasn't sleeping either. She seemed unsurprised when he stepped outside, like she'd been expecting him. You read my logs, she said. It wasn't a question. Why didn't you tell me? Jake's voice came out harder than he intended. Why didn't you just say what was happening? I could have helped you better if I'd known the truth. Vex turned to look at him, and in the starlight, her eyes looked sad. Infinitely sad. Because I am a vampire, Jake. Do you understand what that means to most species? Fear. Suspicion. Hatred. I have been hunted for centuries. I have learned that survival means silence. It means lying about who you are and what you are. She stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the colony lights in the distance. And because, she continued quietly, I thought I was alone in this fight. I always have been. I crash-landed here expecting to die, and instead, I found a stranger willing to help me without question. I did not know how to process that. Humans are not supposed to be kind to beings like me. Jake stepped closer. Well, I am. And I'm not going anywhere. Vex turned back to him, and for the first time, he saw something like hope in her expression. It was fragile, barely there, but it was real. Then we have much to discuss, she said. The Devourer will be here in days. Your colony has no idea what's coming. And I. She paused. I cannot face it alone again. Jake nodded slowly. He still had 1,000 questions, but he knew one thing for certain now. Whatever this was, whatever was coming, he wasn't going to let this woman face it by herself. Then we won't, he said. We'll figure this out together. Jake knew he had to move fast. He couldn't keep something this big a secret, and he couldn't let the colony be blindsided. So the next morning he called an emergency meeting with Dr. Patricia, the settlement's leader. She ran the colony with a steady hand, a former military officer turned administrator who didn't panic easily. When Jake explained everything, showing her Vex logs and explaining the threat, Patricia's face remained calm. She didn't doubt him. She didn't ask 100 questions. She just nodded once and said, "We have work to do." Patricia called an all-hands settlement meeting that afternoon. Every person on Kepler 442b, all 847 of them, gathered in the central square. Jake stood beside Patricia and Vex as the doctor explained the situation. He could see the fear ripple through the crowd. People held their children closer. Some whispered to each other in hushed, nervous tones. But Patricia didn't give them time to panic. "We have 5 days," she announced. 5 days to prepare. This threat is real, but we are capable. We are human. We survive. That's what we do. She divided the colony into teams right there, pointing to people and assigning them tasks. "Raymond, I need you to take all our heavy machinery, the harvesters, the tractors, the equipment. Make weapons. Anything you can think of. You've got the mechanical shop. Use it." Raymond, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s who'd spent decades maintaining farm equipment, nodded without hesitation. "We'll make it work," he said simply. Patricia turned to another man standing near the front. "Tom, you're our best engineer. I need electromagnetic barriers around the colony perimeter. Anything you can rig up that might disrupt whatever this thing is. Use the power plant. Drain it if you have to." Tom was younger, maybe 30, with the kind of sharp mind that loved solving impossible problems. He was already calculating in his head, his fingers twitching like he was writing equations in the air. "I can do it," he said. "It'll be tight, but I can do it." "Linda," Patricia called out to a teacher standing with a group of children. Linda was a thin woman with gray streaking her dark hair, the kind of person who'd always had a gift for organizing and keeping people calm. "Evacuation routes. Safe zones. I need you to organize every family, make sure they know where to go if things go wrong. Make sure the children understand without terrifying them. Can you do that?" Linda stepped forward immediately, already mentally sorting through the logistics. "We'll be ready," she said. Over the next few hours the colony transformed. It wasn't dramatic or flashy. There were no speeches or ceremonies. People simply started working. They worked because they had to, because that's what humans do when faced with an impossible situation. Raymond and his team of mechanics descended on the equipment yard like they were possessed. They started with the massive combine harvesters, machines designed to cut and process crops. Raymond's crew began modifying them, welding armor plating taken from old construction equipment onto the sides. They turned harvesting blades into spinning weapons. They rigged the engines to run at dangerous speeds, creating battering rams out of 20-ton machines. One farmer named David suggested using the chemical sprayers on the crop dusters to distribute something corrosive. Another, a woman named Claire, figured out how to mount them on mobile platforms. Tom set up his equipment in the power plant, working with a team of electricians to create electromagnetic field generators. They pulled copper wire from buildings, repurposed solar panels, and scavenged every capacitor they could find. Tom's theory was simple. If this devourer thing fed on life force, maybe an electromagnetic pulse could disrupt that process. He didn't know if it would work, but he knew it was worth trying. Linda organized the families with the precision of someone who'd spent years managing classrooms. She created evacuation teams, assigned safe houses in the deepest bunkers beneath the colony, and made sure every child knew their role. Even the youngest kids had a job, carrying supplies, staying calm, helping younger siblings. Linda understood that fear fades when people feel useful. But it was the ordinary people, the farmers, the cooks, the maintenance workers, the nurses, who truly amazed Vex. She watched from the edge of the square as humans worked together with almost no coordination beyond Patricia's initial instructions. A farmer named Keith started stockpiling medical supplies without being asked. A cook named Susan began rationing food, calculating how long supplies would last if the colony had to shelter in place. A maintenance worker named Oscar started reinforcing structures, understanding intuitively which parts of the colony were strongest. Vex approached Jake as he worked alongside Raymond, helping to install armor plating on a harvester. "Your species shouldn't be capable of this," she said quietly, watching the controlled chaos of preparation around them. "You have no hive mind. No telepathic connection. You have no special abilities. Yet you respond as if you are one organism." Jake paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked out at the colony, at all these ordinary people doing extraordinary things. "We've survived ice ages," he said simply. "We've lived through plagues that killed half our populations. We've fought wars, faced famines, built civilizations from nothing. We shouldn't have made it this far, really. By all logic, we should have died out thousands of years ago. But we're stubborn. Humans don't give up. When things get bad, we don't fall apart. We come together. That's our real superpower, I think. Not strength or speed or intelligence. Just refusal to quit. Vex was quiet for a long moment watching the humans work. In that moment she understood something she'd forgotten in her centuries of loneliness. Humans weren't weak. They were just different. And different, she was beginning to realize, might be exactly what was needed. The sky turned black at noon. It wasn't a gradual darkening. It was sudden and complete, like someone had flipped a switch and extinguished the sun. Jake was standing in the command center, a reinforced bunker beneath the colony, when the instruments started going haywire. Alarms blared. Screens flickered and died. The Devourer had arrived, and it was worse than anything Vex's descriptions had prepared them for. Through the reinforced observation window, Jake could see it. The thing defied explanation. It wasn't solid. It was like looking at reality breaking apart, a mass of writhing shadow and wrongness that seemed to consume light itself. Where it moved, the landscape withered. Plants turned to ash. The soil cracked and turned gray. Even the air seemed to sicken around it, warping and twisting in ways that hurt to look at. Vex stood beside him, her pale face grim. "It is larger than when I last encountered it," she said quietly. "It has been feeding." Jake forced himself to focus. Panic wouldn't help anyone. He pressed the communication button. "All teams, this is command. The Devourer is here. Initiate Protocol 1. Now." Raymond's voice came back immediately, crackling through the static. "Harvesters are moving. We're in position. Electromagnetic barriers coming online in 30 seconds, Tom reported, his voice steady despite the fear Jake could hear underneath it. The modified harvesters rolled out first. Massive machines that looked like something out of a nightmare, bristling with improvised weapons and armor. Raymond drove one himself, a grizzled veteran who'd spent 50 years understanding machines. The harvesters moved in a coordinated pattern, not trying to attack the Devourer directly, but positioning themselves to create a moving barrier between the creature and the colony. The Devourer turned its attention to them. What happened next defied physics. The creature reached out with something that wasn't quite a limb, just an extension of that writhing wrongness. Where it touched the first harvester, the metal began to corrode instantly. Not rust, complete dissolution. The machine just came apart like it was made of paper. Raymond barely made it out of the cabin, jumping clear as his harvester collapsed into dust. But he was already running toward the second machine, already coordinating with Claire and David to shift their positions. They weren't trying to win. They were buying time. "Barriers at 90%, Tom called out. His voice was tight now. 95. 100. Barriers are live." The electromagnetic field generators activated across the colony perimeter. Massive towers that Tom's team had constructed in just 5 days hummed to life, creating a visible shimmer in the air, a wall of energy that surrounded everything they'd built and everyone they loved. The Devourer slammed into it. The impact was soundless but felt. The ground trembled. The bunker's walls shook. For just a moment Jake thought it might not work. He thought they'd all miscalculated, that the barrier would fail and everything would be over. But it held. The creature recoiled, something like confusion rippling through its form. It attacked again and again with increasing fury. The harvesters kept moving, kept distracting it, kept drawing its attention. Raymond was screaming directions into his radio, moving his team in patterns they'd practiced for 5 days straight. Left flank, right flank, feint north, shift south. They moved like dancers who'd trained for years, not farmers who'd prepared for a week. "It's adapting," Vex said suddenly. "It's learning your patterns. It will break through soon." Jake understood. The Devourer was intelligent. Incredibly intelligent. It was studying their tactics, finding weaknesses. The harvesters were already starting to fail. They weren't designed to dodge a creature that could warp reality itself. 2 more machines had been lost. David was gone. A young farmer named Henry had been caught at the edge of the creature's reach and simply ceased to exist. One moment he was there, the next he was gone like he'd never been born. The barrier was starting to flicker. "All teams, the barrier is failing," Jake called out, his voice steady even though his heart was breaking. "We need to hold on. We need just a little more time." "I don't have any more time." Tom's voice came back, cracking slightly. "The systems are overheating. The barrier is pulling too much power. If I push it any further, it'll blow out the entire power plant. We'll lose everything." Jake's mind raced. They'd prepared for this, for the possibility that their defenses wouldn't be enough. There had to be something they'd missed, some backup plan they hadn't considered. Then Vex moved. She walked toward the barrier, actually walked through it, the electromagnetic field parting for her like it recognized something ancient in her blood. Jake reached for her, but she was already gone, stepping out into the nightmare landscape beyond. "What are you doing?" he shouted into the communication system. Vex didn't answer. Instead, she began to sing. It wasn't music. It was something older than music, something that existed before language was invented. The sound came from deep within her, a noise that carried weight and history and power. And as she sang, her body began to change. Her skin became translucent, almost ethereal. Ancient symbols appeared across her skin, glowing with pale violet light. She was transforming into something else, something that had existed long before humans walked upright, long before civilization emerged from caves. The devourer turned its full attention to her. It attacked with everything it had, and Vex met it head-on. She moved with inhuman speed, her vampire strength on full display. But more than that, she was a conductor, ancient magic flowing through her, responding to the electromagnetic field that Tom had created. "Tom?" Jake shouted. "Now, push it all through her. That could kill her." Tom's voice came back. "She knows." Vex's voice echoed across the communication system, and it wasn't just her speaking, it was centuries of accumulated knowledge, power, and determination. "Do it." Tom pushed the barrier to maximum. Every ounce of power the colony could produce flowed through Vex, turning her into a living conduit between human technology and ancient magic. The electromagnetic energy and vampire power combined, creating something entirely new. The devourer shrieked, a sound that had no equivalent in any human language, a sound of pure fury and confusion as it realized what was happening. The creature tried to retreat, tried to escape, but it was too late. The electromagnetic cage had been completed. The devourer, trapped between Vex's magic and human technology, couldn't escape. It couldn't feed. It couldn't consume. It could only exist in that space, contained, neutralized, powerless. Vex collapsed the moment the cage solidified. Jake ran through the barrier, which had weakened just enough to let him through, and caught her before she hit the ground. She was barely conscious, her form flickering between solid and ethereal. "You did it," Jake whispered, cradling her. "We did it." Around them, the colony began to move again. The sun returned. The sky cleared. And though they had lost people, Henry, David, and 3 others who'd been caught in those first moments, they had survived. Against impossible odds, with nothing but determination and ingenuity and the refusal to accept defeat, humanity had won. Tom's voice crackled through the communication system, shaky but alive. "Barrier is stable. The devourer is contained. We actually did it." 3 months had passed since the battle. 3 months of rebuilding, healing, and learning to live with the weight of what they'd survived. Vex stood in Jake's field as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The soybean plants had regrown, their green leaves stretching toward the fading light. The field looked almost normal now, except for the section where her ship had crashed. That area had been carefully preserved, not as a monument but as a reminder. A reminder that the impossible could become real, that strangers could become family, that the universe could surprise you. She wasn't alone in the field. Jake walked toward her, moving with the careful, deliberate pace of someone who still carried exhaustion in their bones. The battle had taken something from all of them. 3 colonists had died. 5 more had been injured badly enough that they were still recovering. The psychological weight of facing something so alien and horrifying had affected everyone. But something else had happened too. Something that Vex was only beginning to understand. The colony had changed. Not broken, as she'd expected humans to be after such trauma. Changed. Stronger. More unified. People who'd barely known each other before now moved through their days with a sense of shared purpose. Parents held their children closer. Neighbors helped each other without being asked. The entire colony had developed a kind of understanding, the understanding that they needed each other to survive, and that survival meant taking care of one another. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jake said, stopping beside her. He placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture so simple and human that it still sometimes surprised Vex with how much it meant. Vex looked at him. In 3 months, Jake had become the closest thing she'd had to a friend in 3 centuries. He'd sat with her during her recovery, when the effort of channeling that much power through her body had left her weak and barely conscious for days. He'd listened to her stories about worlds long dead, civilizations that had risen and fallen before humanity even invented writing. And he'd never once looked at her with fear or revulsion. He'd just listened and cared, and refused to let her retreat back into the loneliness that had defined her existence. "What do you think?" Jake asked, gesturing toward the colony. Beyond the field, they could see the lights of the settlement beginning to glow as evening fell. The colony was larger now, new structures had been built and more importantly new plans had been made. I think, Vex said slowly, choosing her words carefully, that I do not have the right reference points to judge. I have spent so long alone that I had forgotten what a thriving community looked like. Jake smiled. That's not what I meant. I mean, what do you think about staying? About making this your home? Vex turned to look at him fully. This was the conversation they'd been dancing around for weeks. After the battle, Vex's ship had been repaired, thoroughly this time, not just emergency fixes. She had the ability to leave whenever she wanted. To return to her endless hunt across the galaxy, to continue the mission that had defined her existence for centuries. But she'd decided not to leave. I have been thinking about that, Vex admitted. I have been thinking about it constantly. For 300 years I believed my purpose was to hunt the Devourer. To stop it from consuming more worlds. To save civilizations from the fate that destroyed my own people. She paused, looking back out at the field. I thought that was my only purpose. That it was all I was good for. And now? Jake prompted gently. Now I realize I was wrong, Vex said. The Devourer is contained. It cannot feed. It cannot grow. It is locked in a cage that your species created using technology and ingenuity that should not have existed 5 months ago. Your people, ordinary people, did something that advanced civilizations have failed to do for millennia. You stopped it. She turned back to Jake. And I realized something else. My species has knowledge that your people need. Medicines that could cure diseases you still die from. Technology that could make your lives easier. Understanding of how to manipulate energy in ways that would revolutionize your society. For centuries, I hoarded this knowledge because I was alone, because I thought sharing it would make me vulnerable. Jake waited, sensing there was more. But your people did not hoard their knowledge, Vex continued. Raymond taught me how his mechanical systems worked. Tom explained electromagnetic theory in ways that made me understand human physics better than I had understood alien physics. Linda showed me how you teach your children to think creatively, to solve problems they've never encountered before. You all shared freely without asking for anything in return except that I help you survive. She took a deep breath. I would like to repay that generosity. I would like to stay here and share what I know. Not as a refugee, not as someone passing through. But as someone who has found a home. Jake's eyes grew bright with emotion. He pulled her into an embrace, and Vex, who had spent 3 centuries avoiding physical contact with other beings, allowed it. More than that, she returned it, understanding for the first time that connection wasn't weakness. It was strength. Over the following weeks, plans began to take shape. Vex established a research center in collaboration with Tom and the other engineers. She began teaching classes to the colony's children and adults alike, sharing centuries of knowledge about medicine, energy systems, and the physics of space travel. But more importantly, she listened. She learned how humans thought, how they approached problems from angles that seemed completely illogical until you understood the creativity behind them. Word eventually spread beyond Kepler 442b. Other human colonies heard about the alien woman who'd stayed, who was helping advance human technology and medicine by centuries. The United Earth Council reached out, offering resources and support for formal research partnerships. Vex people, the few scattered survivors of her civilization who'd been hiding in various corners of the galaxy, began emerging from their hiding places, realizing that humans weren't a species to fear, but one to learn from. A year after the battle, the first official exchange program was established. Human scientists traveled to study with Vex people. Vex people came to Earth and to the colonies, sharing knowledge and learning human approaches to problem solving. The combination of vampire longevity and human creativity produced breakthroughs in medicine, energy production, and space travel that would have taken centuries to achieve alone. But for Vex, the real breakthrough was simpler than any scientific discovery. On the evening of the 1-year anniversary of the battle, she stood in Jake's field again. The soybeans had been harvested and replanted. The field looked exactly as it had before the crash, except for the small monument they'd built, a marker honoring the 5 colonists who died defending their home. Jake found her there as she'd known he would. They'd fallen into a comfortable routine, these evening walks through the field where everything had begun. I received a message today, Vex said. From what remains of my civilization. They've asked me to help lead a new council. To help guide our people into this new era of partnership with humans. They want me to represent our species in the diplomacy discussions. Are you going to do it? Jake asked. Yes, Vex said. But I will not leave Kepler 442b. I have decided that this colony will be my home base. I will travel when needed, but I will always return here. To this field. To this work. To you. Jake took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them, though it had terrified Vex at first. Human touch had always meant danger to her. Now it meant safety. Meant home. I think, Vex said quietly, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, that I finally understand why your kind never gives up. It is not because you are strong. It is not because you are fast or intelligent or long-lived. It is because you refuse to be alone. You reach out to strangers. You build communities. You create bonds that transcend species and biology and history. That is your real strength. That is what makes humans extraordinary. Jake smiled. We learned that from you actually. You taught us that connection matters. That we don't have to face the impossible alone. Vex looked at him, and for the first time in 300 years she felt something she'd thought was lost forever: belonging. Not the belonging of a ship or a mission or a purpose defined by endless hunting. But the belonging of home. Of family. Of a place where someone knew your name and cared about your life. The sun dipped below the horizon and the stars emerged. Above them the galaxy spun on, full of mysteries and dangers and wonders. But here, in this field on Kepler 442b, Vex had found something she'd been searching for across centuries. A reason to stop running and start building. Human history would record the year that humanity met its first alien ally. But Vex knew the truth. Humanity hadn't just met an ally that day. They'd shown the galaxy what it meant to be human. And in doing so they'd changed everything.